Hey everyone, welcome to In Response, interviews with intriguing internalizers. My name's Mia Park, and you're either listening to this as a podcast or you're watching this on my Facebook or YouTube channel. So thank you so much for tuning in. I started this interview series as my own internal response to the very crazy outside world of 2020. So just to give us context, it is August 3rd, and we are still with this very mysterious and threatening COVID-19 global health pandemic that is changing and putting all kinds of pressures on us human beings here on Earth. And we're still very much in the other pandemic of racial inequality all over the world. I'm in Chicago right now, and our guest today is in New York City. So, both really good places to talk about both of those pandemics.
Mhm.
I'm so excited to welcome very, very, very talented playwright Lauren Yee.
Thank you for having me, Mia. It's so nice to talk to you.
Oh my gosh, it's such an
Mm.
honor to have you on here too. You're
Aw.
you're very approachable, you're very lovely, you're very friendly, you're super talented, and your plays are like pre-pandemic. They were getting produced all over the
All,
place.
all over the place. I was employing a lot of actors.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
for that. Yes, I mean, yes, I love. Do you know what's so sweet? I love
yeah.
how you're immediately the first thing you talk about is employing actors. Like, thanks for that. That's so
Well,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah. So, let's see. Is there any? You have a very, very long CV, lots of plays, lots of credits. Is
Yeah.
there anything else that you want people to know about you that they can't read about on a website?
Um, my daughter turned 20 months old today. So that was great. Like my husband and I, we take a photo of her every month just to see like the changes. And it's really fascinating to see how it's just like from day to day, she's exactly the same. But if you look, you're like, oh my God, you're like, you see certain months too, where like she grows so much more. Um, so that's a big part of my life right now.
Congratulations,
Thanks.
motherhood. And we'll talk about motherhood during the pandemic later
Yeah.
too. Um, but first, let's check in with what your outside world is looking like and what
Hmm.
your internal response to that world's doing.
Oh. So you and I were chatting a little before this, and I was talking about how kind of my world, I live in New York City, and just like on a given day, kind of pre-pandemic, you just go on all sorts of subways, you go to like meetings here and there, you'd like be running all over town. And now it's very much like, okay, like where can I walk to and back in a reasonable amount of time? So like it's almost like there's this invisible border that's kind of my home is at the center, and it's kind of radiating outwards. And so every day, like I take my daughter for a walk, and I take a similar path, but it's every day like I explore a little different part of the neighborhood, which I haven't done before.
So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's kind of a lovely opportunity to really kind of micro understand
Mm-hmm.
your bubble, your environment there.
Yeah. And then I think I guess like internally, um, I don't know. I'm curious what other people have said. Um, but I feel like internally it's just been kind of embracing the short term, cooking a lot, or kind of missing certain things like food frequently and trying to figure out how to replace that or substitute it in some way. um yeah, so like internally missing the things that are kind of geographically too far.
Isn't that interesting? Like, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And you have to
Yeah,
eat. So, like
yeah,
you said, kind of improvising foodways.
yeah.
I'm wondering, because I'm such a fan of your plays, and you're
Hmm.
such a prolific playwright, and your style is like, well, you tell a great story, always humor, kind of
Hmm.
dark, which I
Hmm.
love. There's always a
Yeah.
lot of those in all of your plays, like
Hmm.
from horror plays to like dramedy kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Hmm.
Um, as even as a playwright, I could break down and ask for separate observations as an
Hmm.
Asian American woman, as a
Yeah.
mother, but as a playwright, like how are you responding to all this?
uh, it's fascinating because usually kind of the patterns, you know, of a playwright or another type of theater artist is that you kind of live and die with the theater season, which typically runs through September to say like June for most theaters. And you know, over the years you learn all the different time periods where you're like, it's season selection time, it's season announcement time, you know, it's time for development workshops. And kind of it's both kind of nice, but also like you're kind of running this hamster wheel of like, I got to finish the play. It's season selection time. It's like you got to get the plays in front of people, and all that has stopped. And we've been like thrown kind of into this period of uncertainty. So it's hard to plan for the long term. I found just like writing wise, I've leaned much more towards just like short little pieces because I was like, I can get that done. Somebody wants to do it, you know, now. It kind of feels like during the pandemic, there's just been this shift for me, and I'm curious if this happened to other people, where I was like, I just need to do things a little bit differently to acknowledge that there's just been a change. Like it didn't feel right necessarily to just be like, okay, just keep doing what you've been doing kind of without looking up. So it's an interesting challenge and opportunity.
Yeah, you know, I was talking to another playwright, Sue Pack, who she's
Mm-hmm.
probably the most disciplined artist I've ever met in my
Mm-hmm.
life.
Mm-hmm.
Like her process hasn't changed. She happens to be the kind of person that literally
Yeah.
writes 3 hours every single day. She sits down the same time every night and
Yeah.
does. I've never been that kind of
Yeah.
person or artist ever.
Mm-hmm.
That's her thing. But so her process is the same, but what she's creating is different.
Mm.
So is your process the same, or is it still like I'm a mom and I feel like just doing a
Yeah. I mean, I think it's in a way it's been like shorter bites rather than longer pieces because I found that like the way that I love to develop work is to workshop it with actors and like directors and like human beings early on. And you know, you're able to do that on Zoom, and I think it's worked out really well for some people. But for whatever reason, for me, like something about not being able to be in that room with people, I think has been hard, and I think has made me realize that I was like, oh, I need to like pivot in some way. And I feel like a lot of artists are pivoting in whatever, you know, way that means to them, just in order to kind of acknowledge the shift.
Yeah, that P word, that pivoting word is
Mm-hmm.
something I've heard more during this pandemic from all kinds of people.
Yeah.
Because you're right, we have to respond to what's
Mm-hmm.
the stimulation is right now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so speaking of stimulation,
Mm-hmm.
you are a mom, you have one baby.
Yes.
What's this been like pandemic wise as a mom?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And I wanted
Um,
to ask that under both pandemics, under the
yeah.
health threat and
Mm-hmm.
also New York City and the racial
Mm-hmm.
inequality that everyone's fighting against now.
Yeah. I mean, I think just in terms maybe thinking about just like practical logistics first of like kind of raising a child during a pandemic, is that, you know, like my husband and I are both continuing to work, and we're lucky enough, you know, to have, you know, work during the pandemic. And it's challenging in that kind of every moment that one of us is, you know, not working, you're caring for the baby. I mean, like we have been pretty lucky in that we've been able to get some like childcare help. Um, you know, and she's also at an age where she's young enough that we can teach her without having to invent a whole curriculum. Like I can't imagine what it's like for parents of like 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, teenagers, you know, who are trying to make sure their kids don't fall behind. Um, and so it's been challenging. I think it's also been just like also rewarding to see how she changes from day to day, and that like, we get to track her progress and like see her learn things in real time. And then I think the other part of it is, I think a little, the second part of your question about like kind of how we're responding, in this climate of like racial inequity, about like how to raise a responsible human being, which is I think a much longer term question. And I think it's also about kind of looking at the resources we take in and looking at kind of like what we're teaching her, even though she's 20 months old, but like what kind of books we're reading to her, what kind of images she's taking in. So things like that, have been on my mind.
I think that's great. I really think that you're never
Mm-hmm.
too young or too old to start understanding more about the
Mm-hmm.
world. And
Yeah.
I know that a lot of your plays often involve Asian American
Mm-hmm.
themes.
Yeah.
So do you feel, since your daughter is multiracial, like
Mm-hmm.
how much of an influence do you want that Asian American background to be on her?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think if I could instill her with a knowledge and confidence of kind of what my family background is, and and give her the feeling that she is a part of that and she owns it, and that she's kind of 100% me and 100% of my husband, like that would be, I think, something that's great to aim for, because I know kind of the challenges of being mixed race in America are different than maybe someone like me who is, specifically Chinese American. Um, but I hope just she feels a sense of like ownership. And I think just being able to convey that in all sorts of ways through learning her family history. Like a lot of my plays have to do with like the breakdown of family stories over generations. And like, I hope I've learned something from my plays in just being like, here is where you come from, and here are all the stories, enjoy and do with them what you want.
Yeah, I was specifically, when you were talking, I was thinking of King of the Yeast, which is a
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
really fun and
Mm-hmm.
wonderful play, very specifically about your father.
Mm-hmm.
And as we mentioned before we went live, I saw the production of it at the Goodman Theater here in
Mm-hmm.
Chicago, and your
Yeah.
dad was there.
Yeah.
And the way that you wrote him as a character was
Mm-hmm.
like, that is an interesting character.
Yeah.
And then your real dad got on stage
Yeah.
and corralled your entire, there was like 55 people on stage that you're all related to, because your
Yeah.
dad pulled every single one of them. He
Yeah.
just took command of the entire stage.
Yep.
And I thought, wow, that's the real dad.
Yeah.
And the character you wrote, it also embodies that. So in a way,
Yeah.
now that you are a parent yourself, you left a real legacy for your daughter. Like, this is your
Yeah.
grandfather for real.
Yeah. And I think a big part of King of the Yeast is feeling inauthentic in a story that you feel like you should own or know. And I feel like that's something, that like a lot of Asian Americans have to grapple with, those feelings of inauthenticity and kind of the danger of like what is authentic, because like Chinese food to me is very different than Chinese food, you would actually find in China. That just as identity morphs and change when new generations go to new places, culture changes, food changes, and that kind of there's no one marker that says this is authentic, or like this is the only way of like viewing it.
That is so fascinating. So as you write your play, and again, your plays cover like you have a lot of kind of genres that you pull
Mm-hmm.
from, which I love with your
Yeah.
plays. How many of them are really
Oh,
autobiographical? Because Canadian
Oh,
rock band,
yeah,
Canadian, hi,
yeah,
Canada,
mhm,
Cambodia,
yeah,
different countries that both start with CNA.
yeah,
With Cambodian rock band, that is
mhm,
another kind of uh, multi-generational
mhm,
tale of
yeah,
discovery. Like how autobiographical do
yeah.
you project into works?
Yeah, I mean, I think King of Thieves is like the most obviously autobiographical play, just because there's a character named after me and there's a character named after my father. Um, and then I think in the other plays, especially recently with The Great Leap and Cambodian Rock Band, I think that there are kind of shades of certain relationships or certain characters that that I can identify with without necessarily being exactly, me or other folks that I know. Like Cambodian Rock Band, it's a father-daughter relationship. And even though kind of my father was never in a rock band, and was not a Khmer Rouge survivor, uh, kind of the slipperiness of that character and the cheerful evasiveness is definitely like my understanding of my dad. So it's like there's
Uh,
shades.
yeah, I love how you just describe that relationship between the father and the
Mhm.
daughter as cheerful evasiveness.
Uh-huh.
I feel like I feel like there's something Asian and Asian American about that. Like I
Mm,
feel like some Asian immigrant dads or my dad, they're either like
mhm.
there's the cheerful evasiveness or
Yeah,
there's the grumpy evasiveness.
yeah.
But the evasiveness is just feels like a natural part of that Asian father
Mhm,
relationship to Asian American
mhm.
child.
Yeah. It never seems like there's an urgency or s uh, of an appreciation of the importance of telling stories, at least maybe on the outside. It always seems like there's a sense of the past is the past, whether you deal with that with kind of cheerfulness, or silence.
Hmm. I think that's cultural, right? There's that
Mm,
whole like saving face culture,
mhm,
the whole East Asian thing that
mhm.
thank you, Confucius, I think.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you a question, and I didn't get to see you when Cambodian Rock Band was in
Oh, yeah.
Chicago. Excellent
Mhm.
production, by the way. But
Thanks.
I did want to kind of secretly ask you, so I'll
Mhm.
secretly ask you like
Yeah,
live on the internet and
yeah,
through the podcast.
yeah.
We talked about authenticity.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
did you ever feel it was a stretch for you personally to write about Cambodian rock band themes, Khmer Rouge,
Mhm.
refugees, and all that?
Oh, yeah. I think 100%. I think not just because I think for many reasons. I think like not just because I myself am Chinese American and this was about kind of a Cambodian American family, but I think specifically because the father is a survivor of the Khmer Rouge. That's something that I think is not just different than my identity, but also very complicated, and that I think just presents all sorts of pitfalls that you could kind of fall into in terms of how you represent that, and how you make that a fully fleshed, well-rounded character. Um, and I think in the beginning of right, even before like I wrote the play that is the play, like I had a lot of ideas that weren't quite right. I think because of how they approached kind of survivor's guilt and trauma. And I think being able to understand how, for instance, joy can be a survival strategy, um, was a huge help and made it feel like there was a person behind this character that I understood and could write for. So I had a lot of I had a lot of hangups and hesitations, and it took me a while to figure out like this is the story, you know that I think I might be able to tell, you know in a compelling way.
Well, why did you want to tell that specific? I
Hmm.
know I read you can read
Yeah.
online like you're influenced by the music dengue fever, and
Hmm.
they've always
Yeah.
been great.
Yeah.
But I mean, why that specific story?
I think as artists, we go, we tell stories and we make art, and maybe a critic doesn't like it, or maybe nobody buys your album, but I think there's rarely ever a sense of what that art costs you in terms of like personal safety, and I think specifically hearing about kind of the artists of the time, the musicians, and kind of how that identity as an artist cost many of them their lives, I think was really the first thing that I found just deeply, deeply unsettling and just like shocking, of like what the ramifications of being an artist of that time were in this particular place, and the stakes, and what that experience must have been like for those artists, you know, especially the ones who survived that, to come out of that and have to kind of suppress a big part of their identity. I think it just put art making in a different context than I'd ever previously thought about.
Wow, that is such a unique observation. It's a very unique situation that historically is there, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, and if for my friends, our friends who are watching and listening that don't know what we're talking about, you can look up Cambodian rock band, read it. If you get a chance to read the play or see it.
Yeah.
It's so good. I mean, I've only seen the Chicago production, and it was just like the perfect casting.
Yeah.
So shout out to everyone who was in that play here. But well, we're at about time. There's so many things to talk to you about, but I want to thank you so much for joining us. And is there any last things that you want to leave us with?
I think I'll be very happy when we can all be in a space again. There's something, you know, that digital media doesn't quite capture, that I can't wait for.
Thanks. Yeah, I have to say, Lauren, of all the different playwrights that I've got a chance to meet and work with here in Chicago, you are the most fun and the most sociable. So when we can all do this again, let's all go out. We'll pack that Korean restaurant again. We got like 30 people to go out for a Korean barbecue that time.
That was great.
Like all Asian characters. I think there was one stage manager that wasn't Asian. Everybody else was Asian. It was great. So we'll go back to the Korean barbecue.
Thanks, Mia.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. Again, this is Lauren Yee. Look her up. And she's also writing for TV now. And when the world changes back to a place where live production of plays and filming and things can be happening, you're definitely going to hear more of Lauren. Thanks again for watching. If you're interested in supporting this series, I have a Patreon page. It's patreon.com/Mia Park. So become a patron, support the series and me and my team so we can keep making more of these. So thank you so much, Lauren.
Thank you.
Good to see you.